You don't see this every day in central London. The sound of cars, buses, and the underground trains echoed through the city. Most people were lost in their own world, focused on their phones or their daily routine. But on this particular morning, something happened that made everyone stop and pay attention. Something unusual appeared on the busy pavement, something people didn't see every day in the heart of the city. In the middle of the crowded street, a man in his late 20s stood with a large easel and a canvas. He wore a patched-up suit, which looked old but had a certain charm. His shoes were slightly worn, and his hair looked like it hadn't been combed for a while, but there was a glow in his eyes that told a story of passion and purpose. He carried a small violin case with him, which rested beside the canvas. People walked past at first, thinking he might be another street performer. But when he opened the violin case and lifted the instrument, a soft, magical melody started to float through the air. The music was not loud, but it was beautiful. It had a rhythm that made people slow down. Some stopped in surprise, while others paused and tilted their heads, curious. But what really caught everyone's attention was not just the music. Next to him, the canvas was blank at first. Slowly, the man dipped his brush into paint and began to draw. With every note of his violin, a new stroke appeared on the canvas. The colors seemed to move with the music, dancing, blending, and forming shapes that were both strange and wonderful. Passers-by had never seen anything like it before. A young woman with a coffee in her hand stopped mid-step, her eyes wide. A group of school children on a field trip pressed their noses against the wooden barriers to get a better view. Even the busy businessmen in suits slowed their steps and watched for a few moments. The man's name was Tom, though no one knew it at the time. He had arrived in London several months ago with a dream that seemed impossible to most people. He wanted to combine music and painting in a way that would make ordinary streets feel like art galleries. He had no big studio, no gallery backing him, and very little money. Every day he walked the streets of London, looking for the right place to perform, the right place to share his art. That morning, he had chosen this busy corner near the tube station because it was full of life. He wanted his art to meet people in the middle of their routine, to make them stop and feel something different. As he played, he didn't just paint what he saw, he painted what he felt. The music inspired each stroke. Sometimes it was soft and gentle, a light blue swirl. Sometimes it was bold and strong, a deep red line that cut across the canvas. Occasionally, a yellow dot appeared here and there, like sunlight breaking through the clouds. The crowd slowly grew and whispers spread among them. "Look at that. He's painting while playing. It's amazing how the colors follow the music." Some people pulled out their phones and began recording, wanting to capture the moment, but they also couldn't look away. There was a sense of magic in the air. People forgot their rush, their appointments, and even their worries. Mothers held their children closer, tourists lowered their cameras to just watch, and even the busy office workers seemed to breathe a little slower. Tom didn't rush. He didn't care about the crowd, the cameras, or even the money he might earn. He was completely absorbed in his art. His fingers moved skillfully over the violin strings, producing music that was soft, clear, and full of emotion. His brush moved with the same rhythm, creating patterns that seemed to come alive under the morning sun. What was remarkable was how natural it looked. Tom didn't seem nervous or tired. His movements were smooth, graceful, almost like he had been born to do this. Yet in truth, the road to this moment had been far from easy. He had grown up in a small town where art and music were not seen as serious careers. His parents wanted him to study business or law, but he had insisted on following his dream. He practiced his violin for hours every day, and he spent nights sketching, painting, and experimenting with colors. For years, he traveled from town to town, performing on streets in small cafes and anywhere that would let him play. Some days he made enough money to buy food, other days he went hungry, but he never gave up. Every note, every stroke was a step closer to this moment. A little girl in the crowd tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, look. The colors are moving with the music," she said in excitement. Her mother smiled and nodded, feeling a warmth in her heart she hadn't expected to feel that day. The crowd continued to grow. Tourists from different countries, speaking different languages, all stopped to watch. Even a street cleaner paused, leaning on his broom, fascinated by the unusual combination of music and painting. Some people whispered to each other, sharing their amazement. "I've never seen anything like this before in London," one man said. "It's like the street has come alive." As the morning went on, Tom continued his performance. He didn't speak much to the crowd, but his art spoke for him. Each brushstroke, each note, told a story of passion, hope, and perseverance. People started to feel a connection with him, even though they didn't know him personally. There was something honest and pure about his work, something that made everyone feel a little lighter, a little happier, even if only for a few minutes. Some photographers approached him, asking if they could take pictures. Tom simply nodded, smiling politely, and continued playing. He didn't ask for money, didn't demand attention, he only wanted to share his art. And in doing so, he created something rare in the middle of the city. A moment where everyone, for just a short while, forgot their busy lives and shared in the beauty of creativity. By late morning, the crowd had grown into a small gathering of dozens. Some people were sitting on the steps nearby, some were standing in the sun, and others had brought children to see the performance. The sound of the violin and the sight of the painting had become part of the rhythm of the street. People who had passed by without noticing anything now found themselves lingering, talking quietly and smiling at strangers. In a city that was always in motion, a city where everyone seemed to be alone even in a crowd, Tom had created a pause, a moment of shared wonder. It was a moment that many would later remember. They would tell friends and family about the man who played music and painted at the same time, who brought color and sound together in a way that made the streets of central London feel alive. Some might even say it was magic, though it was really just talent, practice, and a deep love for what he did. And though Tom didn't know it, that morning marked the beginning of something bigger. What started as a simple street performance would soon be shared far beyond the streets of London, inspiring people who had never met him, in places he had never been. But for now, in that busy street corner, he continued to play and paint, lost in his art, surrounded by a city that had paused to watch, listen, and marvel. The crowd around Tom had grown steadily since he had begun his unusual performance that morning. People were no longer just passing by, they had stopped, mesmerized by the harmony of music and color before them. Among the watchers, one woman stood out. Her name was Sarah, and she owned a small cafe just a few streets away. She had been walking to her shop, carrying a bag of freshly baked pastries, when she noticed the music. At first, she thought it was another street performer, but curiosity made her slow her pace. As she came closer, she realized this was unlike anything she had ever seen before. A man was painting while playing the violin at the same time, a skill that seemed almost impossible. Sarah could not help but watch, her eyes wide with fascination. She had always loved art and music, and yet she had never witnessed anyone combining the two in such a natural and beautiful way. She took a step closer, trying not to disturb the scene, and watched as Tom's brush moved gracefully across the canvas. The colors seemed alive, swirling and blending in patterns that matched the emotion of each note he played. There was something almost magical about the way the music guided his painting, and Sarah felt a thrill run through her as she saw the art come alive before her eyes. When Tom paused briefly to dip his brush into a new color, Sarah decided to introduce herself. She stepped forward and offered a polite smile. "Excuse me," she said softly, careful not to interrupt. "This is amazing. I've never seen anything like it." Tom looked up from his canvas and returned her smile. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice was calm, gentle, and carried a hint of tiredness, though there was no sign of fatigue in his music or his painting. He set his violin down for a moment and wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "I've been practicing this for a long time," he admitted. "It's not easy, but it's what I love to do." Sarah nodded, feeling an immediate connection to this stranger. "I can see that," she said. "You're really talented. How long have you been doing this?" Tom paused, thinking for a moment. "Since I was a child," he said. "I grew up in a small town, and even though people thought music and art weren't serious things, I kept practicing. I worked odd jobs, played in cafes and streets, and never gave up. Now I'm here in London, hoping people will see my work in a way they can feel." Sarah listened carefully, intrigued by his story. She could sense the determination in his voice and the honesty in his eyes. There was a quiet strength about him, a kind of resilience that was rare. "It's inspiring," she said. "You've come a long way, and I can tell this isn't easy for you." Tom shrugged lightly. "It's not," he admitted, "but every day is worth it. Every note, every brushstroke is worth it. Some people don't notice, some walk by without stopping, but the ones who do, they make it all worthwhile." As they spoke, the crowd around them continued to grow. Some people were taking pictures, others were recording videos, and some were simply watching, completely absorbed in the performance. A few children had gathered at the front, pointing at the colors and laughing as they saw shapes emerge on the canvas. An elderly man leaned on his cane, smiling quietly as he nodded along with the music. Even the buskers and street vendors nearby paused for a moment, caught up in the unusual beauty of the scene. Sarah could see why people were drawn to him. There was a rare authenticity in Tom's performance. He wasn't performing for money or attention. He wasn't rushing to finish or trying to impress anyone. He was fully immersed in his art, and that honesty resonated with everyone watching. It was as if, for those few minutes, the busy city of London had slowed down, and people were able to appreciate something pure and creative right in the middle of their routine. Feeling a sudden impulse, Sarah decided to help in any way she could. She approached Tom and asked, "Do you need any supplies, paint, brushes, water?" Tom shook his head, smiling kindly. "I have everything I need," he said, "but thank you for asking. It's very kind of you." Sarah paused for a moment, studying him. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I own a small cafe nearby. Maybe you could come there sometime. I'd love to have you perform, even just for a small group. People would love this." Tom's eyes brightened at the suggestion. "That's a wonderful idea," he said. "I'd be happy to. Art is meant to be shared, and a cafe sounds perfect. It's more personal, more intimate. People can really see the details, hear the music. I'd love that." For the next hour, Sarah stayed near Tom, occasionally chatting with him while the crowd remained enchanted by his performance. She learned more about his journey, about the years he had spent moving from city to city, performing in streets and small venues. He told her about the struggles he had faced, days when he had no food, nights when he slept on benches, and moments when he had doubted himself. But he never gave up, and every experience had shaped him into the artist he had become. As he painted, Sarah noticed how focused he was. Each stroke seemed deliberate, yet free, as if he was dancing with the music. The melody of the violin and the patterns on the canvas were perfectly synchronized. People around them whispered, commenting on how unusual it was to see someone so dedicated and talented in the middle of a busy street. Many had never seen street art combined with live music before, and they were fascinated. At one point, a little boy wandered too close to the canvas, and Sarah held her breath, worried he might disturb the painting. But Tom noticed immediately and smiled at the boy. "Would you like to help?" he asked gently, holding out a brush. The boy's eyes lit up, and he carefully added a small streak of green to the canvas under Tom's guidance. The crowd clapped softly, touched by the kindness and patience Tom showed. Sarah felt a sense of warmth in her chest. Here was a man who had endured so much, yet remained patient, kind, and focused on spreading joy through his art. She could see why the crowd was captivated, not just by his skill, but by his character. As the morning turned to noon, more people joined the gathering. Tourists from different countries, speaking in different languages, all stopped to watch, drawn by the music and the colors. Street performers, shopkeepers, and even office workers on their lunch break lingered to catch a glimpse. The air was filled with a sense of community, a shared moment of wonder that transcended age, background, and culture. Sarah watched him, thinking about the difference one person could make. Tom had taken a corner of central London and transformed it into a place of beauty, a space where people could pause, smile, and feel inspired. It reminded her why she loved this city, despite its busyness and chaos. There was always room for creativity, for kindness, for moments that made life a little brighter. Eventually, Tom set down his brush and violin for a short break. He wiped his hands and smiled at the crowd. Many people clapped, some even cheered softly. Sarah approached him again, offering him a cup of water from her cafe. "You've made everyone's morning better," she said. "I think you should do this more often." Tom laughed softly. "Maybe I will," he said. "It's moments like this that make it all worth it." As Sarah left for her cafe, she knew she had witnessed something special. She had met an artist who combined music and painting in a way that was rare, unique, and unforgettable. She also knew that this was only the beginning of Tom's story in London. He had touched the hearts of everyone who had stopped to watch, and she could already imagine the day when his art would be recognized far beyond the streets. For now, though, the city continued its usual rhythm. People returned to their routines, buses honked, and the streets buzzed with life. But in one corner of central London, a young artist had created a pause, a moment of shared wonder, a memory that would linger in the minds of all who had witnessed it. And Sarah, who had seen it up close, would always remember the day she discovered something extraordinary in the ordinary flow of the city. The morning had turned into early afternoon, and the crowd around Tom had grown larger than anyone could have imagined. People were no longer just curious passers-by. They were fully absorbed in his performance. The combination of music and painting was so mesmerizing that even the busiest Londoners stopped to watch, forgetting about meetings, deadlines, or the rush of the city. Tourists with cameras hovered, trying to capture the moment, while locals leaned against nearby lampposts, sipping coffee and smiling quietly. Tom was completely focused. His violin bow moved gracefully across the strings, producing notes that floated above the city noise. At the same time, his brush glided over the canvas, creating colorful swirls and intricate shapes that seemed to dance with the music. Each stroke had purpose, each note had meaning, and together they formed a story only Tom could tell. People around him could feel the emotion in his art, sometimes light and playful, sometimes deep and thoughtful. The crowd was silent except for the soft music, as though everyone understood they were witnessing something rare and special. Among the crowd were children, wide-eyed with wonder, pointing at the emerging images on the canvas. "Look at that, Mom! It's like the painting is alive!" a little girl exclaimed, tugging at her mother's sleeve. Her mother smiled and nodded, feeling a surprising warmth in the cool London air. Nearby, two elderly men exchanged glances, both shaking their heads in disbelief. "I've been coming to this city for years," one said, "but I've never seen anything like this before." Suddenly, a small boy from the crowd wandered too close to the canvas. He tripped on the edge of a small paint container, and everyone gasped. For a moment, it seemed like the perfect painting would be ruined. Sarah, who had stayed nearby to watch, instinctively took a step forward, worried about what might happen. But before anyone could panic, Tom reacted in a way that surprised everyone. Instead of showing anger or frustration, he knelt down to the boy's level and smiled. "It's okay," Tom said gently, holding out his hand. "Would you like to help me finish this part?" The boy's eyes lit up. He nodded eagerly, holding onto Tom's hand as he took a small brush. With careful guidance, he added a green streak to the canvas. Tom encouraged him softly, showing him how to follow the rhythm of the music with each stroke. The crowd, initially tense, relaxed and began to smile. Children clapped, parents cheered quietly, and even the adults in the crowd seemed moved by the kindness and patience Tom showed. For the boy, it was a magical experience. He had never imagined he could participate in creating art in such a direct way. And for the crowd, it was a moment of shared joy and surprise. People began to understand that what they were witnessing was not just a performance. It was a demonstration of creativity, patience, and human connection. Tom had turned what could have been a small accident into a lesson about embracing mistakes and turning them into something beautiful. The moment also revealed another side of Tom's character. He had worked for years in isolation, performing on streets and in small cafes, yet he never lost his ability to connect with people. Even with a growing crowd of strangers, he treated each person with respect and warmth. His art was not just about colors and music. It was about bringing people together, creating moments that made them smile, think, and feel inspired. As the boy finished his small contribution, he stepped back, and the crowd erupted in soft applause. Tom smiled at him, giving him a small nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said simply. "You did great." The boy ran back to his parents, beaming with pride, and Sarah noticed that even the adults in the crowd seemed affected by the incident. People whispered to each other, sharing their impressions and marveling at the unexpected collaboration between artist and child. The interaction reminded everyone that art could be more than just something to look at. It could be an experience, a shared moment, a memory that lingered long after the music stopped and the painting was finished. Some of the crowd began to take photos of the canvas, capturing the colors and shapes created not only by Tom, but also by the small boy's contribution. Others recorded videos, knowing that they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be hard to forget. Meanwhile, Sarah thought about the cafe she owned nearby. She realized that if more people knew about artists like Tom, they would love to experience art in new ways. She imagined hosting him in her cafe, where he could play music and paint in a more intimate setting, allowing guests to feel the art up close. The idea excited her, and she resolved to speak to him once the performance was over. The afternoon sun began to shine brighter, and the light changed the colors on the canvas, making them look even more vibrant. People in the crowd began to notice small details they hadn't seen before. The delicate blending of blue and purple in the sky, the way the yellow highlights seemed to glow as the violin notes played softly. Some tourists whispered to each other, pointing out details that reminded them of their own childhood or favorite memories. The street that had once been ordinary now felt alive, as if the music and colors had transformed it into a magical place. Tom continued to play and paint, seemingly unaware of the attention he was drawing. His focus was complete, yet he remained gentle and approachable. People in the crowd started to talk quietly among themselves, sharing how moved they were by the performance. "It's amazing how someone can create something so beautiful in the middle of the street," one woman said. "It makes you stop and think about what's possible." As the performance went on, the city seemed to pause around them. Cars slowed slightly, pedestrians lingered longer, and even the street vendors seemed to take notice. There was a sense of shared wonder that connected everyone who had stopped to watch. People were no longer strangers. For that moment, they were part of something bigger, something magical that could only happen when someone like Tom shared his art with the world. Then, as if on cue, a small group of tourists from another country approached. They spoke a language most people in the crowd did not understand, yet they all pointed at the canvas, smiling and clapping. Tom acknowledged them with a nod, continuing to play, and the music seemed to bridge the gap between languages and cultures. In that moment, the crowd realized that art truly was universal. Music and painting could communicate feelings and emotions that words could never capture. As the afternoon progressed, the crowd began to take notice of the detail and skill in Tom's work. The canvas was no longer just a mixture of colors. It was a story unfolding in front of them. Shapes became familiar images. Trees, birds, small buildings, and even abstract forms seemed to carry meaning. People whispered about what they saw, sharing interpretations and pointing out details others might have missed. The conversation added another layer of connection, as the art encouraged not just observation but discussion and reflection. Sarah watched all of this with admiration. She realized that Tom was not only talented but also brave. Performing in a busy street, facing unpredictable crowds and potential challenges required courage. But his determination and passion shone through, inspiring everyone around him. Sarah felt grateful that she had decided to stop that morning. She had stumbled upon something rare and beautiful, and she knew that it would stay with her for a long time. Finally, as the afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, Tom paused briefly to take a drink of water. The crowd clapped softly, showing their appreciation for the performance. People lingered, reluctant to leave, as if the street itself had become a temporary sanctuary for art and connection. Children laughed quietly, parents smiled, and even the more serious adults seemed lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Tom looked around at the crowd and smiled. He knew that what he had created was more than just a painting or a song. It was a memory, a shared moment, a small miracle in the midst of a busy city. And while he had no idea how far-reaching the impact of that moment would be, he felt satisfied knowing that he had touched people's hearts, even for a short while. For the people in the crowd, it was an experience they would not forget. They had seen an artist who combined music and painting in a way that was both creative and generous. They had witnessed patience, kindness, and the beauty of human connection. And they had learned that even in a busy, crowded city like London, there was still room for wonder, magic, and extraordinary moments that broke the routine of daily life. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Sarah approached Tom again. "That was incredible," she said. "I don't think anyone will forget this day. You've inspired everyone here." Tom smiled modestly. "I'm glad," he said. "That's all I hope for, to share something that makes people feel happy, curious, and alive. The rest doesn't matter." And with that, he packed up his brushes, carefully rolled up the canvas, and carried his violin case. The crowd slowly melted back into the rhythm of the city, each person carrying with them a small piece of the magic they had witnessed. The street returned to its usual pace, but the memory of that afternoon lingered. People would remember it not just as a performance, but as a reminder that beauty could appear anywhere, at any time, if only someone had the courage to create it. By the next day, the story of Tom's performance had begun to spread quietly through central London. The unusual combination of music and painting, along with the small boy's accidental but beautiful contribution, had left a lasting impression on the people who had watched. Many had taken videos and photos on their phones and shared them with friends or on social media. Some posts quickly started gaining attention, and by afternoon, people who had not even been there were starting to notice. The idea of a young man creating art while playing music in the middle of a busy street seemed so extraordinary that it captured people's imagination. Tom, however, was unaware of the growing buzz. He arrived at the same corner the following morning, carrying his violin case and painting supplies as usual. He was motivated by the same desire that had guided him for years, to share his art with anyone who happened to pass by, to make them pause and feel something beautiful. The streets were busy again, filled with the sounds of traffic, chatter, and footsteps, yet there was a sense of expectation in the air, as if the city itself was curious about what would happen today. As he set up his easel and began unpacking paints and brushes, he noticed a few familiar faces from the previous day in the crowd. Some were locals, while others were tourists who had returned to see him again. There was a sense of anticipation. People whispered to each other, discussing how excited they were to witness another performance. Even those who had missed him yesterday found their way to the street, drawn by social media posts and recommendations from friends. Tom smiled quietly to himself, appreciating the attention though he never performed for fame. He simply wanted to share what he loved doing most. Once again, the music began. He lifted his violin, and the first soft notes drifted into the morning air. At the same time, he dipped his brush into the paint and began a new canvas, allowing the music to guide his strokes. The crowd watched in silence, mesmerized by the fluidity of his movements and the harmony between the sound and colors. People who had walked past for years without noticing the corner now stopped, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Among the crowd, people began to pull out their phones, recording or taking pictures. A young woman streamed the performance live, explaining to her followers how she had stumbled upon this incredible artist in central London. The small live stream quickly attracted hundreds of viewers, with comments pouring in. "This is amazing! I wish I could see this in person. He's so talented." Tom continued his performance, oblivious to the cameras, fully focused on the music and painting. He did not ask for attention. The attention had simply found him. As the morning turned into early afternoon, the crowd grew larger. People from all walks of life had come to see Tom. Businessmen and office workers lingered on the street corners. Schoolchildren pressed their faces against barriers. Tourists posed for photos beside the canvas, and elderly residents quietly watched from benches. The air was filled with admiration, curiosity, and a shared sense of wonder. For many, it was a rare experience to witness art created live, right in the middle of a busy city. During a brief pause to change brushes, a local journalist approached Tom. She introduced herself and explained that she had heard about his performance online. She wanted to interview him and tell his story in the local newspaper. Tom agreed politely, still modest and calm. As the journalist asked questions, he shared his journey, from practicing violin and painting in a small town, to traveling across cities, performing in streets and cafes, to finally arriving in London. He spoke about his struggles, his dreams, and the joy he found in sharing his art with strangers. The journalist listened attentively, clearly moved. "People need to know your story," she said. "It's inspiring and rare. Your art isn't just beautiful, it connects people in a way few things can." Tom nodded, appreciating her words but remaining humble. He didn't seek recognition, he only sought to share his creativity and passion. Meanwhile, the crowd continued to grow. People who had arrived late to the street were astonished at the scene. The painting on the canvas was beginning to take shape, colors swirling and blending in harmony with the music. It was almost as if the canvas had a life of its own, moving and breathing with every note. Children pointed excitedly at the shapes forming, imagining stories behind each brushstroke. Adults smiled, noticing details they had never expected to see. For many, it was a moment of escape, a brief respite from the busy routines of life. As the day progressed, The story of the small boy who had contributed to the painting spread as well. People loved the part about how an accident turned into a collaboration. Social media users shared the story widely, praising Tom's kindness and patience. The boy's simple act had added a layer of human connection to the performance, showing that art could be shared, inclusive, and joyful. People commented on how much the story warmed their hearts and reminded them of the importance of encouraging creativity in children. By mid-afternoon, several local journalists, bloggers, and photographers had arrived. They wanted to capture the moment, interview Tom, and share the story with a wider audience. Tom was careful to stay focused on his performance, answering questions politely but continuing to play his violin and paint. His dedication impressed everyone. They noticed that he didn't allow the growing attention to distract him from the work he loved. Among the crowd, some street performers stopped to watch, inspired by Tom's ability to captivate so many people with such simplicity. They exchanged whispers, commenting on how unusual it was to see someone combine two art forms in such harmony. Even the regular street vendors nearby paused to admire the performance, their usual chatter replaced by quiet appreciation. The streets of central London, normally filled with noise and routine, felt transformed, almost like a temporary festival of art and music. As the performance continued, a few local cafe owners, including Sarah, approached Tom to invite him for small events at their shops. They were eager to offer him a platform for more intimate performances where people could enjoy the music and painting up close. Tom was surprised by the invitations, but accepted with a humble smile. He explained that his goal was always to connect with people through art, and these invitations were a chance to reach an audience in a different way. By late afternoon, the story of Tom's street performance had spread beyond London. People who had seen videos online began to visit the street specifically to watch him. Some came from other parts of the city, others traveled from neighboring towns. The once ordinary street corner had become a destination for those seeking a unique experience. Local news stations arrived, capturing the story live. A few journalists interviewed the crowd, asking them about their impressions. The answers were all similar. People were amazed, inspired, and touched by the performance. Tom continued without pause, fully immersed in his art. The crowd cheered softly, clapped at the right moments, and whispered comments of admiration. Children giggled as they watched shapes form on the canvas, parents smiled, and even the busiest adults seemed to pause, feeling the rare joy of witnessing something extraordinary. The city around them carried on, but for those present, time seemed to slow, allowing them to fully enjoy the experience. As the sun began to lower in the sky, the performance gradually came to an end. Tom carefully set down his brush and violin, allowing the crowd to applaud. People clapped, cheered softly, and many approached him to express their gratitude. They spoke of how the performance had lifted their spirits, inspired them, and reminded them of the beauty of creativity. Even strangers who had never met each other found themselves talking and smiling, connected by the shared experience. Sarah, who had watched from the start, approached Tom once more. "You've made a huge difference," she said. "Everyone here today will remember this. You've inspired people in ways you might not even realize." Tom smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "I'm just happy to share what I love," he said. "If people feel something, if they pause for a moment and appreciate it, then it's enough." As the crowd slowly dispersed, many lingered to take one last look at the canvas, now filled with vibrant colors and shapes. The small corner of central London had been transformed into a space of art, music, and human connection. People walked away carrying memories that would stay with them long after the performance ended. The videos, photos, and stories would continue to spread, touching even more people, and slowly, Tom's name began to reach beyond the streets of London. By evening, the city returned to its normal rhythm. Traffic resumed its steady pace, people returned to their routines, and the usual sounds of London filled the streets. But the impact of the day remained. Tom had done more than perform. He had created a moment that would be remembered, shared, and celebrated. A street corner had become a stage, a canvas had become a story, and a violin had become a bridge connecting hearts and minds. For Tom, the day ended quietly. He packed his supplies, rolled up the canvas, and walked through the streets of London, reflecting on what had happened. He knew that this was only the beginning. People had seen his art, shared his story, and were inspired. But more importantly, he had reminded himself why he pursued his dream: to connect, to create, and to bring joy into the world. The day after Tom's remarkable street performance, the corner of central London where he had played and painted still buzzed with curiosity. People who had been there yesterday returned, hoping to see him again. Others had heard about the story from friends, family, or social media, and now sought the chance to witness something extraordinary in the midst of the city's usual chaos. The once ordinary street, lined with shops, cafes, and the constant flow of pedestrians, had transformed into a place of expectation, a small haven where people felt the possibility of wonder and creativity. Tom arrived in the morning, carrying his violin and painting supplies, his expression calm but full of quiet anticipation. He had spent the night thinking about the previous day, the smiles on people's faces, the laughter of children, the quiet amazement of adults, and even the small boy who had contributed to his painting. Each memory reminded him of why he had chosen this path, despite its difficulties. For years, he had struggled to pursue his dream, facing doubts, rejections, and endless obstacles. Yet in this moment, it was clear that every effort had been worthwhile. As he unpacked his materials and set up his easel, a small crowd had already begun to gather. Some faces were familiar, people who had come back to witness his art again. Others were new, drawn by the stories and videos that had spread across social media. There was a sense of quiet excitement in the air, a shared anticipation among strangers who all hoped to experience the magic of creativity in real time. Tom smiled softly, taking a deep breath before lifting his violin to his shoulder. The first notes of music floated through the air, soft but steady. Immediately, the crowd became still, mesmerized by the sound. As Tom's bow moved over the strings, his brush followed the rhythm, painting shapes, swirls, and colors that seemed to move with the music itself. The canvas, blank only moments ago, began to take life. People in the crowd gasped quietly, pointing to the patterns and shapes as they emerged. Children whispered excitedly to each other, imagining stories behind the colors. Adults, too, were captivated, noticing details and subtle shifts in tone and form that made them smile or pause in thought. By late morning, word had spread even further. Journalists, bloggers, and photographers had arrived, eager to capture the unique performance. Local newspapers were preparing stories, and some small television crews set up cameras, recording both the music and the evolving painting. Despite the growing attention, Tom remained focused, never letting the crowd or cameras interfere with his art. He continued as if he were alone, completely absorbed in the music and colors that guided him. Among the crowd was Sarah, the cafe owner, who had returned to see him once more. She had watched the performance before, but this time she noticed something new, the subtle joy and confidence in Tom's movements. He seemed more at ease, more in tune with the city and the people around him. She also noticed how the crowd responded to him, not just with admiration for his talent, but with genuine warmth and respect for his kindness and patience. Tom had created a connection that went beyond art. He had brought people together, even if only for a short while, in a shared experience of creativity and inspiration. Suddenly, a small girl in the front of the crowd tugged at her mother's hand. "Mom, can I try?" she asked, pointing at the canvas. The mother hesitated, unsure if it would be allowed, but Tom noticed immediately. He knelt down and smiled at the girl. "Would you like to add a color?" he asked gently. Her eyes lit up and she nodded eagerly. Under his careful guidance, she painted a small swirl of blue, following the rhythm of the music. The crowd clapped quietly, touched by the innocence and joy of the moment. It was a simple act, yet it perfectly captured the spirit of Tom's performance. Art was for everyone, and every contribution mattered. The morning passed with moments like these, small interactions that brought smiles and laughter. Children, tourists, and even some adults participated, adding tiny touches to the canvas or moving to the rhythm of the violin. The street felt transformed, alive with energy, color, and sound. People talked quietly among themselves, sharing their interpretations of the shapes on the canvas, discussing what they felt from the music, and connecting with strangers who shared the experience. By early afternoon, Tom's work had begun to draw attention beyond the immediate street. Social media users who had shared videos the previous day continued to follow his updates. Posts were liked, shared, and commented on hundreds of times. People who had never set foot in London were inspired. commenting on how beautiful it was to see someone create art in the streets, and how refreshing it was to see creativity and kindness at the center of a busy city. The story of Tom's performance and of the small boy and girl who had contributed spread like a ripple, touching hearts far beyond the street corner. Tom remained humble throughout, accepting compliments politely but never letting them distract him from his art. He knew that the attention was fleeting. What mattered most was the experience of sharing his creativity, the joy of seeing others engage, smile, and feel inspired. Each note from the violin, each brushstroke on the canvas carried a part of him, and through his work he communicated something universal, the beauty of persistence, patience, and connection. Sarah, standing nearby, reflected on the transformation she had seen in both the crowd and Tom himself. She realized that this was more than a performance, it was a lesson in life. People had come to witness art but were reminded of something deeper. That joy could be found in unexpected places, that kindness mattered, and that creativity had the power to unite strangers. She thought about her cafe, her small corner of the city, and the potential to host performances like this, bringing art into everyday spaces where people could pause, reflect, and feel inspired. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the performance gradually came to a gentle conclusion. Tom set down his violin and brush, allowing the crowd to clap and cheer softly. People approached him to express their gratitude, praising his talent, his patience, and the warmth he had shared. Children beamed with pride at their contributions, parents smiled, and even adults who rarely engaged with street performances felt a sense of wonder. The moment was quiet, yet powerful, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. Tom carefully packed his supplies and rolled up the canvas, now filled with vibrant colors and shapes that told a story of creativity, collaboration, and joy. As he walked through the crowd, he thanked people quietly, offering a nod or smile to each person who had watched and participated. There was a sense of fulfillment in his steps, a quiet contentment that came from sharing his art in a way that touched others deeply. The street slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Cars and buses moved along the roads, pedestrians resumed their hurried walks, and the ordinary sounds of central London filled the air. Yet the impact of Tom's performance remained. People walked away carrying memories of color, music, laughter, and shared connection. Some would post about it online, ensuring that the story spread even further. Others would carry the feeling in their hearts, a reminder that extraordinary moments could happen anywhere, even in the busiest parts of the city. That evening, Tom reflected on what had occurred. He thought about the children who had joined him, the crowd that had gathered, and the strangers who had smiled, laughed, and been inspired. He understood that this was only the beginning of his journey in London. People had seen his art, shared his story, and felt a connection that went beyond the canvas and the music. It was a reminder that persistence, kindness, and creativity could create ripples of impact far greater than one might imagine. In the weeks that followed, the story of Tom's performance continued to spread. Local cafes invited him for small, intimate performances, journalists featured him in stories, and social media users shared videos that reached audiences across the city and even the country. Tom remained humble throughout, focusing on what mattered most, creating art, sharing it, and connecting with people. Every note, every stroke was a continuation of his journey, a journey fueled by passion, patience, and the belief that even the smallest acts of creativity could bring joy to others. For those who had witnessed the original performance, the memory lingered. People remembered the music that seemed to carry them away, the colors that danced and swirled across the canvas, and the simple acts of participation that made them feel part of something larger. They remembered the kindness of Tom, the excitement of the children, and the way the city, even for a brief moment, had felt alive with possibility. And for Tom, the experience reinforced a simple truth. Creativity was not just about talent, skill, or recognition. It was about connection, about sharing joy, and about creating moments that could inspire, uplift, and remind people of the beauty in the world. He knew that central London would continue to bustle, people would return to their routines, and life would move on. But the memory of that extraordinary day and the impact of his art would remain, both for him and for everyone who had witnessed it. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm, golden light over the streets, Tom walked away from the corner with a quiet smile. The canvas he had created, The music he had played and the connections he had fostered were more than accomplishments. They were a testament to the power of creativity and the human spirit. And though the city would soon return to its usual rhythm, the story of that remarkable day would live on, a reminder that magic could happen anywhere, even in the heart of central London. For the people who had seen him, for the children who had painted a small stroke, and for anyone who would hear about the story, it became clear. Extraordinary moments could appear in ordinary places, and the courage to create, to share, and to connect could leave a mark far beyond what anyone could imagine. Tom's journey was far from over, but he had already succeeded in the most important way, by touching hearts, inspiring dreams, and reminding everyone that beauty and wonder could exist, even in the busiest streets of a bustling city.